Agama. My name is Sherrie and my Dharma name is Xianxing. We were asked to give talks this spring on either the Tiantai school or the Agamas. And my talk is a little bit about both of them. I have trouble making up my mind sometimes. So preparing this talk was a little bit worrisome. Don and Caddy gave very good talks on Tiantai earlier, and maybe they will agree. This is a very big and imposing subject to learn about. So, one of the first things I saw when I started reading I want to read it again. It's very confusing. So I will try to simplify things more than that one. Master Ji founded the Tiantai school in China in the 6th century. Now, why is Master Ji important? Why are Tiantai important? Well, Master Ji was the first person in China to categorize the Buddhist teachings. And his analysis of Buddhist philosophy and ideas was also very influential in China. He wrote several meditation manuals, which are still in use today. You can buy them on Amazon. They've been translated into English, several of them. Why would putting the Buddhist teaching into categories and understanding how they relate to one another be important? Well, by the time Master Ji was alive, many Buddhist teachings and manuscripts had come to China. If you've ever looked through the Buddhist book selection on Amazon or at a bookstore, you can probably sympathize. There are so many to choose from. How do you know which one to pick up and read? Buddhism talks about a lot of things in many different ways, and that was confusing in ancient China just like it is now. There were more than 18 different schools or branches of Buddhism that developed in ancient China. They preserved and emphasized various teachings and practices, and sometimes they had different interpretations of the teachings. So if you imagine, we were back in ancient India when the Buddha was alive, or maybe shortly after he died. It might have been confusing back then too. So imagine we're all back in ancient India, and we're old friends, and we've gotten together after many years. And after we get reacquainted, I might say, guys, I have to tell you about this wonderful talk I heard a while ago. There's this teacher called the Buddha, and he gave this great talk on mindfulness of the breath. It was just wonderful. Totally changed the way I meditate. My mind's so much calmer. I just really loved it. You should listen to him talk if you ever get the chance. And then my friend would say, mindfulness of the breath? I don't know. The Buddha actually came to my village, the Kalama village, and he gave us advice. But it wasn't about breathing. We asked him about how to pick a teacher who we should listen to, because so many teachers have come to our village and they all say different things, and we don't know who to listen to. So the Buddha gave us advice on how to listen to teachers, how to figure out whether what they were saying was correct, to test what they were saying, and to decide what sort of teacher we should follow. I'm much better at recognizing reliable speakers and discerning the truth of what people say now. Then another friend says, I don't know, you must be talking about a different Buddha. My town was being terrorized by this serial killer. We called him Angulimala because he had killed so many people and had so many bones from their fingers, he was able to make a necklace out of their bones and wear it around his neck. Angulimala means a necklace of bones. Nobody could stop this guy. He had killed, I think, at least 99 or 100 people. Even the king couldn't stop him. We were all hiding in our homes. We were afraid to go out. Nobody would leave town. The crops were dying in the fields. The animals weren't getting fed. It was just terrible. But this Buddha, he was not afraid. He just went walking out like nothing was wrong. he met up with this serial killer, Agama, and actually stopped him from murdering anyone else. Agama took vows and became a monastic. So the Buddha saved our lives. And the next friend says, well, I heard of a Buddha who was very compassionate. He helped this woman whom we called Skinny Gotami. She was so thin because her child had died, and she was overwhelmed by grief. She wouldn't eat, she wouldn't sleep. She carried her baby's body around with her, asking someone to help her child. Nobody could help her. Her family couldn't reason with her. Her friends couldn't reason with her. So she went to the Buddha and asked him for medicine to help her baby. He said, okay, I can help your baby, but to make the medicine, you have to get some mustard seeds. Mustard seeds were very common in India. He said these mustard seeds had to come from a home where no one in the family had died. So she was very happy to think someone could help her baby, and she went around from house to house, begging people for a mustard seed, but only if no one in their family had died. Every house she went to, someone had lost a loved one. After going to house after house after house, she finally realized everyone has suffered the same way I have suffered. We're all going to die. There's just no escaping this. And it's not me alone who has suffered this way. So she went back to the Buddha and said, don't do the medicine. She buried her baby. And she actually became a monastic also. So someone like Venerable Ananda, who was with the Buddha all the time, heard every word and remembered them all, he was really lucky. Not all of us are so fortunate. We may only get to hear bits and pieces of the Dharma, or we may only listen to what affects us personally the most. You can see from the examples I gave, which are all from real sutras. That's the name of the sutras. Line of access to insight. But you can see from all these examples that the Buddha taught or did what people needed at the time. Whatever they needed to hear, whatever they needed help with, he would respond to that. He didn't have just one way of thinking and he was going to let everybody know about it. He responded to what people needed and how they needed to receive it. So if a very scholarly person came to him, the Buddha could give a scholarly talk. If someone came with a personal problem, the Buddha could help with that. If people's lives were in danger, the Buddha might even help with that. He taught what was needed, as was needed, in a way that was appropriate for the audience. As you can imagine, this resulted in a huge variety of teachings. And the people of China, who greatly valued learning and literacy, tried to collect all of them. With all these different teachings, it was difficult to see sometimes how they all related, because they covered so many topics, and some of them seemed contradictory to one another. So along came Master Xi. Master Xi was born in 538, I believe. There he is. Master Xi was born in 538. He was only 59 when he died. He was born to a family that had connections to a court. So his father was an official at court. His mother came from a Taoist family, and when he was very young, he wanted to become a monastic, a Buddhist monastic, and his family said no. His father wanted him to become an official at court, or at least a scholar of some note. And his mother's family said, well, if you want to get into spiritual practice, you ought to become Taoist, because that's what we do. And he didn't want to do it. He lived, unfortunately, in a very violent period in Chinese history, called the Six Dynasties period. There were multiple countries fighting with each other, invading each other, taking over each other. Both his parents died when he was 17, and he saw his hometown invaded by a neighboring kingdom. He also saw a large and well-known library destroyed by troops. He saw the soldiers burning down the buildings and gathering up all the writings that were inside and throwing them into flames to make sure that they were all destroyed. though he lived through a very violent time and he witnessed violence himself. But he was then able to become a monastic. As I say, he was fairly young when he died. He was only 59. But in the 42 years he lived as a monk, he founded 35 monasteries and ordained more than 1,000 monks. He wrote more than 9,000 pages of scholarly work, which is an amazing amount of work. Now, those things alone are enough to make him pretty important in the history of Buddhism in China. But he's also known for what his writings contained and what they did. There are some of his books that have been translated into English. One of the Buddha Sutra and other topics. But those are the ones that are the easiest to find in English. Master Xi was accomplished as a meditator, but he was also known as a scholar. And some of the works he studied, which had a great influence, the 25,000-line Prajnaparamita Sutra, the Daji Du Lun, which is a commentary on the larger Prajnaparamita Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, which we read a part of when we chant, and the Mila Madhyamaka Karika by Master Nagarjuna. Now these deal especially with middle way teachings, emptiness and existence, non-dualism, and the perfection of wisdom. The Vimalakirti Sutra was also very influential, and it also deals with emptiness and non-dualism. It's also about the ability of lay people to practice and understand the Dharma, and the equality of women and men in Buddhism. There have been people who said women couldn't become enlightened, for instance, and the Vimalakirti Sutra says they can. The Lotus Sutra is the one that is most identified with Master Xi, and that covers pretty much all of the above, plus the idea of one Dharma. Xi classified the Buddha Dharma in many different ways, and if I tried to talk about them all, it would be very confusing. So I'm just going to focus today on two of the things we talked about, and those are the two truths and one Dharma. Now, you've likely heard of the two truths before because they're very important in Mahayana Buddhism. The two truths are the conventional truth and the ultimate or supreme or absolute truth. It goes by a lot of different names. Conventional truth is our empirical, everyday world. The truth of our everyday world. We eat because we're hungry, we sleep because we're sleepy, we die because our bodies stop working. This is a truth of causes and conditions and of interdependent origination. The conventional truth can be described with words and understood with words. Ultimate truth is the one beyond this one, and that gets a little tricky. One way of understanding ultimate truth is that when we examine things that we were just talking about in terms of causes and conditions, in terms of interdependent origination, how this happens because of that, that ends because this happened, we can come to the conclusion that nothing is permanent, nothing is unique and separate from everything else, which leads us to say that nothing has a permanent self. So this is no self-teaching. Ultimately, the ultimate truth is beyond words and can only be known by experiencing it yourself. Now, Master Xi got into much more complicated discussions of the two truths and looked at them on 4 different levels. We'll talk about that a little bit later if we have time. But the most important part of what he discussed in terms of the two truths is that he said there were really 3 truths. The third truth is the truth of the middle way, of not clinging to either extreme. Not getting stuck in an extreme, an enlightened being is able to know and comprehend all three truths at once. She discusses these three truths both in terms of categorizing the Dharma and also in terms of how to meditate. He discusses meditating with each of these. You can go step by step, or you can have just a sudden awareness of all of it at once. Master Ji did not invent middle way on his own. The Buddha talked about middle way. And it goes back to some of those sutras that I mentioned earlier. They all discuss the two truths, those first set. And this is also where the Agamas come into my talk. The sutras, which are the teachings of the Buddha, exist in various languages. Some of them are in Pali and Sanskrit, which are two related languages of ancient India. Buddha's teachings were first written down in those two languages. When they were taken to other countries, they were translated into other languages. So sutras also exist in Chinese and Tibetan and in other languages. So the Chinese Agamas are teachings of the Buddha that were taken to China and were translated into Chinese. Many of them also exist in other languages, especially Pali, also in Sanskrit, and some in Tibetan. There's one very important sutra that I wanted to talk about in relation to Ji, and this was the Katyayana Gotra Sutra. It's a really important sutra, but I don't actually remember hearing about it before I started studying this. Nagarjuna, who wrote the Madhyamaka mentions it. Chandrakirti, who wrote a famous commentary on Nagarjuna, also mentions it. It exists in Pali, it exists in Sanskrit, it exists in the Chinese Agamas. It's remarkably similar in the three languages, and it discusses some of what Ji teaches us about. So it's very short, but I'm going to read the one that was translated from the Chinese Agamas. At one time, the Buddha was staying at the reception hall in the forest of Natika. Then the Venerable Katyayana came to where the Buddha was, saluted him by prostrating and touching the feet of the Buddha, and sat down at one side. He then asked the Buddha, "World-honored one, you speak of right view. What is right view? How, world-honored one, does one establish right view?" The Buddha said to Katyayana, "There are two bases to which people in the world are attached, to which they adhere: existence and non-existence. Because of their attachment and adherence, they are based on either existence or non-existence. In one who has no such attachment, bondage to the mental realm, there is no attachment to self, no dwelling in or setting store by self. Then when suffering arises, it arises. When it ceases, it ceases. If one does not doubt this, is not perplexed by it, if one knows it in oneself and not from others, this is called right view as established by the Buddha." Why is this? One who rightly sees and knows as it really is the arising of the world does not hold to the non-existence of the world. One who rightly sees and knows as it really is the cessation or passing away of the world does not hold to the existence of the world. That is called avoiding the two extremes and teaching the middle way. Namely, because this exists, that exists, because this arises, that arises. That is conditioned by ignorance, activities arise, and so on. And the sutra goes on to run through the 12 links. When ignorance ceases, activities cease. Thus the whole mass of suffering ceases. When the Buddha had taught this discourse, the Venerable Katyayana, having heard what the Buddha said, became free of all influences, attained liberation of mind, and became an arahant. So the sutra explains the two truths in the middle way. The two extremes are the extremes of either thinking everything that exists is permanent and real in some special way. Thinking, for instance, that who I am is unique. I don't exist because of other people. I exist because of what I am. I'm this whole person all by myself. I'm separate. I'm unique. People who cling to that tend to go to the extreme of what the Buddha called eternalism, thinking that things will last forever. And when you realize that things don't last forever, it's very upsetting. As Gotami learned when her son died. The other extreme is called nihilism. That's when we think that, nothing really exists, we're all going to die anyway. If you take that to an extreme, you can think nothing really matters, because we're all going to die anyway. Some people use that as an excuse for cruelty or not bothering to be kind to others, because what does it all matter in the end? We're all going to go. The Buddha taught on the middle way, which is not clinging to either one, being aware of each one. And in the sutra, he specifically says you have to know it by yourself, not taught by others. That is right view, is realized by the Buddha. And this is what Master Ji discusses with the three truths. He actually discusses various levels of understanding them. At first, you might understand emptiness simply as the fact that things do end, that things are impermanent. And that when you think about things that way, you think about them as either or. They either are real or they're not real. This is dualism. It's either this way or it's that way. So that is sort of the beginner's level of understanding the two truths. Master Ji Yi discusses how to progressively go through contemplating various levels of understanding on this and eventually reaching the level at which you know them all at once. So that you don't cling to either side, you're aware of all of them. And so that when things change, we're not surprised because we know that they change. But at the same time, we know that we all live in this world with each other, and so we have to be kind and compassionate to each other and think about others. So Master Ji discussed how to contemplate progressively on these three truths. He also classified the Dharma teachings according to the three truths, which brings me to the Lotus Sutra. Ji Yi thought that the Lotus Sutra was the most perfect teaching in the sutras because it teaches that all dharmas are really one dharma and that they all, as a whole, encompass the three truths, the various positions of understanding them, and also how to reach the higher understanding. In chapter 5 of the Lotus Sutra, there's a simile used to describe the teachings. It's often called the Plant Sutra or the Flower Sutra. All of us are like seeds in the ground. Some of us may grow up to be beautiful flowers like the tulips that are in front of me or downstairs. There's some real live tulips in a bowl that are very pretty. Some of us may grow up to be pretty flowers. Some of us may grow up to be grasses. Some of us may grow up to be maybe a kind of prickly, thorny plant. Some of us may grow up to be huge trees. All of us grow up to our own inherent potential. But we all need rain. So the Dharma in this simile is like the rain. Everybody can use the rain, but everybody uses it according to their own conditions. Cactus doesn't need very much. A big tree might need a lot. Some of us get just a little rain and we pop right out of the ground and we're full grown. Some of us take a very, 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 very long time to grow. We need to keep getting more and more and more and more. We have to keep going back to the teachings. But however the rain falls, and however we use it, it's still the same Dharma. No matter whether we end up being a tree or a rose bush or quackgrass, we all use the rain to fill out our potential that we had when we were just a seed in the dirt. So all the Dharma teachings are ultimately about helping us realize our true nature, no matter how long it takes us. There's another story about the Dharma, that the Dharma teachings are like a raft. It helps you get across a river. When you get to this other side, you don't need the raft anymore. You don't keep carrying it with you across the desert or wherever you're going. You don't need the raft. So the teachings are like that. You use them when you need them, and then when you've accomplished what you needed to with them, you don't need those teachings anymore. So some of the teachings are considered skillful means. We need them for some specific problem we have, maybe a habit we have. There might be a Dharma teaching that helps us with that specific habit we have. If we tend to have a problem with anger, there are teachings on anger. Teachings for whatever problem we have. One of the ways I like to think about them also are of a child growing up. So when we talk about people taking bodhisattva vows, we call them baby bodhisattvas because they're learning how to be a bodhisattva. So we all start off as a baby. We don't know how to walk. We gradually learn to crawl. The things we need to learn to crawl. We need to stand up. When we first start toddling around, we're creeping along, holding on to the edge of the table, holding on to somebody's hand. And we keep developing our muscles and developing our skills. And sooner or later, your toddler is going to let go of your hand and take off running into the next room. It probably cause a lot of trouble. But the teachings are also like that. There are various teachings for various stages in your life and for various stages in your understanding. Mr. Ji and other people have classified the teachings of the Buddha in 4 ways. One is that some of the teachings are worldly teachings. These are teachings that especially deal with that conventional truth that we were talking about. Those of us who are worried about being good people, getting along with our families, not harming others, and so on. There are many teachings that help us with those things. Worldly teachings also deal with understanding causes and effects and interdependent ordination and all those things. Another branch of the teaching would be the individual teaching, in which the Buddha gave teachings that are specifically for the individual's own needs, to help you develop skills. The individual teachings are skillful means teachings that help you to develop what you need to develop. There are also therapeutic teachings, which are to help with a specific harm or suffering you may have. You can think of those kinds of teachings as medicine for an illness. And the other category of teaching is the supreme teaching, which is the ultimate teaching of the Dharma. Mr. Ji, the Lotus Sutra is an ultimate teaching. One other aspect of the teachings that I wanted to emphasize, I talked about already, was the adaptability of the teachings. So one of the things that's important about the worldly teachings is that it is adapted to what people need. So that, for instance, I mentioned when Buddha was teaching to scholars, he taught in a scholarly way. when he was teaching the householders, he talked about household things. And when the Dharma goes to a new culture, it adapts to that culture. Because in one culture, they may have different views of the world than in another culture. They may have different views about life and death, for instance. For instance, in China, where ancestors are very important, there were Dharma practices that developed in association with the Chinese, the importance the Chinese people placed on their ancestors, so that there are special holidays and there's special attention given to those. But it works within the Dharma itself to help people with these issues that they have. So what can we take away today from Master Ji's teaching? I don't think, I still don't understand that one. But we live in the 21st century. Here in America, we see a lot of violence in the world. Maybe not in our own hometown, as Master Ji did, but we can turn on the TV or look at our phone on the news feed and see lots of violence. We can also see a country that seems to have some big divisions, and people sometimes get very angry and violent over those divisions, like we're seeing with the politics that we have now. We also live in a country which was introduced pretty recently to the Buddha. And there are all these new teachings coming in. Thousands and thousands of Buddhist books are available. There are probably thousands of Buddhist teachers. Hundreds of Dharma centers, countless websites on the internet. And it can all be very confusing. Sometimes people get into big arguments online, like this is Buddhism, and no it's not, that's not the Dharma because Master so-and-so said this, and you're in opposition to that. And these arguments can go on for page after page after page after page online. There are even some people who might say that the way that people in Asia have been practicing the Dharma for the past 2,000 years is all wrong. We modern Westerners can tell you what Buddha really meant. So all these things can be confusing. But if we keep in mind the Lotus Sutra and its teachings on one Dharma, and that there are different kinds of teachings for different situations, for different people, it can help us to understand that someone else's Buddhism can still be Buddhism even if it's not my Buddhism. Robes might be different color, they might chant in a different language, they might bow differently. Some people visualize, some people only meditate, some people chant. But as long as it's beneficial and it's not harming them, and it's helping them to become more whole, better people with better understanding, then it can still be the Dharma. It's also important to remember that when we say, well, I don't like that Chinese stuff, I don't like that Tibetan stuff, I like the real Dharma, we're just bringing another culture to the Dharma. So we're adapting the Dharma to another culture. It's not to say that it's the Dharma or the true Dharma, because we're all interpreting it in light of our own culture, because we're shaped by our culture. So there is one Dharma, but it's all the Dharmas, not just this particular teacher or that particular teacher. So, I hope we can all practice one Dharma all together as one huge Sangha all around the world. May all beings know happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings know the great joy that is free from suffering, and may they dwell in equanimity that is free from attachment, aversion, and ignorance.